Many people view speed limits as a suggestion. Some even see them as a challenge. How fast can they go without getting caught by a highway patrol? The feeling of exhilaration as you fly down the road can be addicting, but it's only fun until it's not, when that split second of an unexpected object in your way has you frantically trying to hit the brakes. It can be tragic when you're upside down on the side of a highway, car totaled, and you're just lucky to be alive. Speed limits aren't a guess. They're scientific estimates that help keep you alive in a crash.
So I think it's really important to get drivers to start to connect the dots more, that we don't want you to follow the speed limit because it's the law and it'll help you avoid a penalty of a ticket. But we want you to follow the speed limit because the speed limit has been set intentionally to help save your life in the event of a crash and to save the life of others in the event of a crash.
That's Dr. Nicole Morris, director of the Human First Research Lab at the University of Minnesota. She says that as much as speed limits help save those in the car, they also help protect those walking or biking on the side of the street. Driving 25 miles per hour might seem like a turtle's pace, but for those not in a car,
they cannot sustain the impact of a crash once we start to get close to 40 miles an hour or over. So this is why it's so important to travel 25 miles an hour. We often think 25 alive, because that's where we're really in this sweet spot of we're not asking people to move at a crawling speed. It is a slow speed compared to what people may want to travel. But if you strike a pedestrian at 25 miles an hour, they're going to have a much better chance of making it home to their family than at 40 miles an hour, where they have very little chance to make it home to their family. They're very high likelihood to die or have a life-changing injury from that crash.
And a crash is not just one event. Dr. Colleen Peterson is an assistant research scientist at the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. She explains there's a lot more to a collision than we think.
What's really interesting to think about is that there are actually 3 crashes within every one crash, and speed actually impacts like every single one of those issues. So first of all, speeding makes you at increase of getting into a crash at the start. So it decreases the amount of time that you have to react to a danger on the road,
making it more difficult to stop your car in time. After the initial collision, the second crash happens inside the car. The momentum of the car sends you flying forward into your seatbelt, steering wheel, or even through the windshield.
And then inside of that is your third crash, actually, where your internal organs are still sloshing forward. And so your aortic valve can get twisted and torn more severely when you're going at that higher speed with that greater impact.
The beginning of the pandemic actually saw an increase in speeding behavior. The United States Department of Transportation reports more than 20,000 people died from car crashes in the first half of 2021. That's the largest number of estimated fatalities in that amount of time since 2006. Morris says overall, speeding went up, but there was also a huge jump in something called super speeding.
These are individuals who are traveling, say, over 100 miles an hour on the highways. And so that's really concerning, and we're seeing a real uptick in the types of serious and fatal crashes that are attributed to speed than we have ever seen before, certainly not in recent years.
Morris says speeding has a lot to do with attribution theory. It's the idea that we think our behavior is a reaction to our environment, while others' same behavior is a personality trait. So we think we're speeding for a good cause. We're going to be late. We're keeping up with traffic.
But when other people speeding faster than maybe they are, we'll tend to look at those people and say, well, they're being reckless, they're being unsafe. So I think that there is a disconnect between looking at our own intentions and not recognizing that we're being unsafe. We tend to think we're just sort of the consequence of some negative situation that's forcing us to drive fast. But these are all intentional decisions that we make where we ultimately decide to drive at an unsafe speed through our community and putting ourselves and others at risk.
Less congested roads during the pandemic gave drivers an open runway. Changes in law enforcement have also had an impact. Many agencies across the country have pulled back their traffic resources, according to Morris, which means they're writing fewer and fewer tickets.
And so the potentially diminished risk of enforcement is something that drivers are noticing. And so the fear of consequence, which again, like I said previously, we're not often thinking about the consequence of being crashed. We're thinking the consequence is I'm going to get a ticket. So if that fear of consequence is diminished, where now I think it's really unlikely that I'm going to get a ticket, that sort of unlocked some of our risky drivers to have more free rein to speed because they're not worried that they're going to be getting a speeding ticket.
Peterson believes the best solution to speeding is one that forces drivers to stop. Redesigning roads can slow people down without them having to consciously think about it. For example, narrow roads, bike lanes, or trees lining streets help prevent speeding.
And maybe people have also seen in the uptick of roundabouts being installed on different roads. That's sort of the same thing where you build the road and the design to get people to slow down. You don't rely on people to consciously decide to slow down because that's not always going to work.
Speeding is a major factor in fatal crashes. While car manufacturers keep upgrading safety features, Morris says slowing down drivers would impact the rate of road deaths more than anything else.
The solution is so simple. And so that's sort of what's so maddening to me is that we really could solve it. And we just don't. We just have no will to stop these deaths. And people are dying every single day on our roadways because we are all collectively being selfish. We're all collectively saying we'd rather go fast. We'd rather have our individualism than shrink down these 40,000 deaths that we have a year. It's disheartening.
A lot of people seem to think that if we don't get caught speeding, it's okay. And it might be okay. You'll probably arrive safely. But is it worth the risk of having the next trip be your last? You can find out more about all of our guests through our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, search Radio Health Journal on Facebook and Instagram. Our writer-producer this week is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
We have people who are struggling to keep a roof over their head. They're struggling to put food on their table. And yet we continue to spend more time trying to figure out how we can lock people up than to give them a good life.
Have private prisons become the scapegoat for a larger issue?
Then, how a new treatment for essential tremor can help give people their lives back.
When they realize that, wow, this really worked, they all get a little teary. So that's why Sarah called it the operation that makes grown men cry.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
Under those circumstances, the situation became untenable, and the stresses that the requirements of caregiving required ultimately tore the family apart.
The mental and physical toll of caring for an elderly loved one. Then,
he made a pact with himself that he would do whatever it took legally and educationally not to die.
How one guilty man on death row duped the public into believing he was innocent. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station. And subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.